This is Pod Populi,
podcast for the people.
Welcome to the Fusionary Health Podcast. I have a special guest in store for you today, and this is not a topic I have taken a deep dive into ever before. But when I met Dr. T and we got to dive into her topic, Dr. Theresa Skaar really impressed me because she said, literally, I study aging. And I thought, aging? Who studies aging? Like, we study longevity, but we don't talk about aging. So she has a Ph.D. in social psychology. She's certified in mind-body medicine. She specializes in grief, aging, body image, mindfulness, and communication. And I love that you are so dedicated to this topic. You even teach at a college or school or center of aging. So welcome, Dr. Teresa. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me on. This feels really exciting. And I just, because I'm just a clarifier, I did teach at the University of Nevada, Reno. So shout out to the Sanford Center and all of my friends there. And the reason I actually applied to grad school at UNR was for the Sanford Center for Aging, because I knew that I wanted to be in, and it's like they highlight the four, we are for aging, which is a very interesting thing with our, community messages and society kind of, ideas. So that it is very exciting. And then as you were reading the other things, I was like, yeah, it always feels like a lot, but the through line is like what makes us human. We all have a body, a container, and thoughts about that body and container. And then, if we're alive, we will all experience grief. And if we're lucky, we all experience aging.
It's so
we have
true.
to talk about it. So.
Yeah, and we get to talk about it. And the thing is, when you interviewed me, that's how we met, was you were talking to me about being on your podcast. The first thing you asked me was like, what do you think about aging? And I knew you'd ask, your podcast is about aging, but it threw me because I had to and I always know, like, just tune right into your center and answer the question with total honesty.
Mm-hmm.
To me, aging is this lovely opportunity we have to experience and enjoy life at a different level, because we're coming at it with more wisdom, more awareness, more knowing, sometimes more resources because we're working so hard to build what we have. But certainly awareness, because I think about it a lot, that as I age, am I getting more narrow in what I do? Have I already done everything, been there, done that? And so I only want to do the few things. Am I aging in a way where I'm getting tired and slowed down? So do I need to address that? Or am I becoming a more distilled and potent version of all the good things that I am? Because there are a lot of good things in there. So I know that you on your website have this quote. You say, "It is never too late to be what you might have been." And I love that, because here we are in a day and time where we're sent a lot of messages around, like, pick your career, pick your passion, pick your purpose. Like, you better live that thing out all the way till the end. Or we've been living in different constructs around what's expected of us. And maybe we haven't broken out of our boxes that we put on ourselves to go try different things or experience different things. So can you share your perspective and why that is your favorite quote and why you shared it on your site?
Absolutely. So I am a, late bloomer, windy path follower. I did not expect to be here in any capacity whatsoever. When I started my career in nursing. So I was a nursing assistant. That was my first career. And then I found myself working at an insurance company and doing claims adjusting. And then I was at an engineer firm, and I was a marketing assistant, executive assistant, office manager, all at different points throughout the time I was there. And while I was doing all of this, I would take a class here, take a class there. I had tried to go full-time to college at the quote unquote appropriate time, but I ended up going spring quarter and everyone was partying. And I even said quarter. So that, that tells you that it was a ways ago. But I went spring quarter, everyone's partying. I'm like, whoa, this is fun. I slept through my first ever college exam. So I kind of always thought, like, is this for me? And, it would be hit and miss. And then I, during an economic downturn in the 2008, I think, around there, 2009. I got laid off from a job that I absolutely really hated. Like I cried almost every day. This was a different one from the engineering firm. And when I got laid off, my husband was like, yeah, go back to school. So I got to go back to college as an adult. So like I got to go full-time school, my husband would be like, I'm dating a college student, and I was in my late 30s, and so this was to get my undergrad, right? And I got my undergrad in psychology. And while I was there, I met my advisor mentor friend, and she kept talking to me about grad school. And I was like, oh my God, I just graduated from college, like at 41. So I was 41 when I graduated with my BA. And so she kept saying grad school, and, and then life kind of just circles you back, and I thought, okay, I'll what's this grad school thing? And we were at dinner and she's like, you got to do this, 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 and this. And I have this scrap of paper in my home office framed because I did those steps. She was very ready for me to be ready, so as soon as, I was ready to hear it, she was like, do these things. And so then, and I applied to it, a couple schools because she's like, you can't just apply to one, but I knew I wanted to go to the University of Nevada, Reno, because they had the Sanford Center for Aging. And I was really fortunate enough to be accepted. And my husband and I then left Minnesota for the first time. We traveled, but we moved from Minnesota to Reno in our 40s. So I was 44. And on the top of my personal statement, you have to give a personal statement when you apply to grad school. I put that quote. So that quote was right there. And that was just been a guiding kind of light. And, when everyone in my cohort, who I love, shout out to my cohort, but they all could have been legit my husband and I's children, right? So, you're doing something at an age. And fortunately, I was surrounded by, again, people who were very pro-aging. I then was able to have the gift of being able to teach undergraduate students about aging. And in my introduction to aging studies, we talked about everything. We talked about, mental health, emotional health, sex and aging. We talked about, ageism and how we hold that. And, and at the beginning of the semester, many students would be very like, I don't know, I'm 18, 20, whatever. I don't like, who cares? And then to realize, and our motto at the Sanford Center in the gerontology academic program is every body's aging. And so we had really fun stickers and things like that to really bring this home, because we are aging, but we other, and we just are like, oh, those people with the gray hair, or those people with the, what wrinkles or whatever. And I don't want to be that. Right. And so then we do everything to not be that, all the while we actually are aging. And that's what I loved about our conversation, because I asked you, because I wanted to understand your philosophy behind it, because there's some people who are actively trying to live forever.
Sure.
I'm curious about that. I mean, I love a good vampire story. Don't get me wrong. But I'm seriously, it's a genre that I really enjoy. Yeah. And in our, reality that we know it today to be, if we fight it, there's research that shows if you have a negative aspect towards aging, you actually, die 7 years earlier than people who have a positive attitude towards aging.
Whoa, that's a pretty serious statistic.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, although, some people would be like, well, I don't want to age. So yeah, get me out of here in my 70s. I don't want to live to 77 or 97 or whatever. So yeah.
Yeah. It is interesting to see people's different perspectives. Like my mom even makes a comment and she's like, I don't want to live that long. I'm good at 80. I'm done. And I'm like you have a choice. Like you have control. How obscure. First of all, God knows, you don't know. And secondly, your choices just decide the quality of your life at the end. Yes. That's it. Like I could say that I'm so healthy and so awesome. And so I might get to live till 90.
Right.
Yay. If that happens, great. But I would only want that if I had a healthy lifespan all the way through. I don't want to deal with diseases for 20 years at the end. But again, I don't have so much control over that. Like it's choices you make, and then it's a culmination of the lifestyle and everything else you do. So it's interesting to me because so many people have different viewpoints, but you were working at a center that's for and pro aging that taught
Mhm.
gerontology. So what was that like? What was the key mission there that you were trying to impart on people?
So, well, there's a couple of things because I do want to quick circle back to that idea of like living, because we do want to live as well as we can for as long as we can. I have had, I mean, I coach and I talk to people, and I did talk to this one woman who, and this is a message that kind of bears out. So it's a, kind of keeping that balance, because she said we did everything right. And then she had some disease, and her husband had a macular disease. And so she was feeling really kind of bitter. She's like, I did everything right. And so to your point, there's so much that we don't have control over. So what I like to talk about with that is, yes, we have I think we have a duty and responsibility to care for these containers we're in, love them, treat them well, not abuse them to, in whatever ways that we do, because we want to cope.
Sure.
And, there are circumstances. So how can you meet those circumstances with, curiosity, equanimity, and saying like, okay, this happened, and what is still possible. So I really wanted to highlight that, yes, I think we all would say, yeah, we'll take 90 years if they're a good solid 90, but we don't have that control, and they're so at any age. But working for the Sanford Center, it was amazing. So it's like a 3-legged stool. They do research, but they call it translational research. So they are taking in information that then they can immediately apply.
Nice.
Whether it is, looking at people living with dementia, and then, they're not at the Sanford Center, but they're connected. And they wrote, a manual and a book that is for people who have been diagnosed with dementia. And it's, beautifully done. So it's like, how can I take in information and then have that be like a powerful impact in the community or in people, versus many times in academia, you're spending a lot of time writing an article, and that article gets read by the people in that silo who are interested in that topic. So for me, I think because I came to all of this later, I want the things that I do to make a difference. And so that really definitely is the case at the Sanford Center. They
Nice.
also then have, community programming. So they have grants and funds where they do, and they offer free classes. One of my favorite, and one of the community's favorite, is called Fit and Strong. And so that's an exercise program where people meet for 8 weeks and they get really connected. And my students would then volunteer, or they would do their service learning there. And they would be like, I tried to do those exercises. They were hard, because they'd walk in and they'd be like, I got this. And then they're like, dang, like that's no joke. And so so it's research, it's community education, and then the education in the university level, which for me, I had the gift of, like, one of my students, I always say this, he was, he had declared, and they take this class early on usually. So he had declared like an engineering degree. And by the end of the semester, he decided to go into nursing. And I was like, oh, okay.
Wow.
Like, I felt really, really excited about that, because we need nurses. And then other people come into my class and they would say, yes, I know I want to work with older adults. And then they would do their service learning component and actually be, working with older adults. And they're like, yeah, I don't want to do that. And I was like, yes, this is when you find that out. Like,
Sure.
we're exploring. I wasn't trying to convince anyone to be like, oh, yay, because there are inherent challenges with aging, for sure. And so it's not all kumbaya and puppies, but yeah, it was very exciting to be there and shift their perspective. They'd say, oh, I know how to talk to my grandpa a little bit easier. Or people who come in, one woman worked at Starbucks, and she used to always get really frustrated at maybe her perception of how people were if they looked a certain way, meaning older. And she was like, I know how to talk to them differently. And they would always say at the end, at least one student would go like, oh, they're people, because and we could talk about othering across the board, but for aging, we don't necessarily pause and think that we might be creating our own internalized ageism.
Sure. And as you were speaking about that, I thought to myself, I think I'm ageist on both sides.
Ooh,
Like
same.
I do tell my sister-in-law sometimes I'm into my kids, but I'm not so into other people's kids because they're children. They don't. I'm not. Hopefully I don't get in trouble for saying this on my own podcast, but kids are. I don't want to hear their little thoughts and opinions all day. I can spend an hour with a kid, but that's it. After that, I'm like, okay, I need to go hang out with adults my age. And then on the same spectrum, as much as I don't want to hear little kids chitter chatter, when someone's much elder to me, I assume that they're not operating at the speed I am. And
Yeah.
that's just so unfair. Like it's this bias. And so
Wow.
it's funny because my mom is 67. So she's like an in between. She's not in her 80s like some of my grandparents and people around me are parental figures. And she'll say, listen to me. I have more energy than you. I built more success than you. Don't even tell me that you know better, okay? And I'm like, all right, schooled by my mom, but she's not wrong. She's not wrong. And so it's just interesting to watch like those ideas around ageism and why do we as a society not value as much sometimes people who are older and wiser. Like when you were speaking, I thought of the Anne Hathaway movie where she hired an intern.
Oh,
And
yes.
the intern, I love those clips of that movie because he had worked in that space and he knew so much and he was wise and he was able to take care of her and support her and give her insight that no one else in her life could. And so what if we brought that back and around ourselves? Like we built our lives to be more surrounded by those who have wisdom and experience rather than being so egotistical and thinking we know best and our speed is best and thus they don't know.
Well, and you're bringing up such great points because I would have my students write a paper on ageism and we would talk about the reverse ageism. So some of them would be very young and be in a management position and people would come in and be like, I want to talk to your manager. And they're like, I am the manager. No, I want to talk to the real manager. And they're like, I am the real manager, because of that perception going the other way, or being in a one of my students said something like, when I'm with my family and there's like a hard topic, they say, oh, I don't know what I'm talking about. And so I think that it is normal. I think that it can be hard to be around both because there's not necessarily an inherent wisdom that comes with aging. That comes with, I've been paying attention. I'm trying to grow and learn, because I think we've all probably had pretty uncomfortable conversations with people who are just like that. I'm doing air quotes with the like, oh, that's just grandpa. Like he's going to say some crazy stuff. So wisdom, I think, can be in all ages. And I attribute that to awareness and perception. And if we are with any bias, oh my gosh, like, can we bring curiosity? Because I think if we have wildly different perspectives, and if we're like, oh, I'm curious how this person thinks. And I think that's why you and I do podcasts, right? We're like, how do people think, and what are people doing, and what's their approach to the world? And that's why I listen to podcasts, right? Because I love people's stories and I love learning that way. So I think bringing curiosity and like a beginner's mind where I'm not assuming that I already know. And to your point, they're, kids can be challenging, depending on, how they are. And my friend's son, he's great. I could just sit with him and talk, 10, almost 11, but he has I don't know, old soul, I guess. I don't know, but not all kids are like that.
True. And you said something interesting. We don't inherently gain wisdom as we age. That mic drop moment. Like, you're right. We don't all necessarily become wiser as we age. That kind of is given to us if we're really grabbing life and being present to it and aware of it. Because I can definitely go through seasons where I'm like checked out and it's just like work, kids, relaxation, and you're just in autopilot modes. And then there are periods of time where I'm like, okay, let's get back in, let's check back into everything. So I wonder if there are a lot of people who might age but might not necessarily carry the wisdom, insight, experience, or whatever it is that you're seeking.
hmm And I think we have, so there's a couple of things that are coming to mind as you say that, because it is, like, and we can't, yes, we need to rest. Okay. And we need to do work, and we need to raise our families and support those people in our lives. Certainly not every minute can be a learning lesson. And, can you stay open and curious to what's happening in your life? And I'm certain, I would bet that your children are probably your best teacher, right? Like,
They
you know,
really are.
right? So you're like, ooh, I see reflected in them something that maybe I don't like in myself, but I love that. Anyway, so there's lots of layers. And I'm not super well versed in kids, except for I have a large circle of kids in my life. But going back to like wisdom, curiosity, I want to say that we can be wise at any age. Like
True.
and I would say that, sitting down and next to someone that, we can get to know them. And sometimes it takes patience because yes, cognitively, older adults, sometimes their processing slows, and that is a fact. They're not losing intelligence, but research bears out that yes, maybe someone could do something faster, like a younger person, when they put them head to head, like doing the same task, but given more time, often they might be more correct in like their responses or answers, depending on what they're testing. So the gift that you could give if you're trying to get curious about this intergenerational interaction is, take the pause, like maybe, and it can feel like forever, but like if you ask a question and then you do like a maybe in breath, out breath 2-3 times and just give space to see if they answer, and you might be freaking surprised because there are some things. And we live in a different world because back in the day we didn't have computers that had all of the knowledge or as much knowledge as you want. We had to rely on people who had lived, who would be passing that on, and there wasn't a lot of them, right? So there was not a lot of people who got to an advanced age. Now many people get to an advanced age, so we have this weird like wisdom equals age, but I think that's like a past thought because the people who were living were our sources of information and how we did things and how to do things, and now we're not relying on them that way, but also we're living longer as a species.
True. It's your grandmother, your mother, your grandfather, your father who taught you how to do
Mhm.
things in the past. My
Yeah.
kids don't need me to teach them most things. Now they educate me. Mom, did you know that aluminum foil has this in it? Mom, did you know? And I'm like, oh my God, you're being educated by Instagram and YouTube Shorts. Like, what's happening here right now? So they honestly, at this age, 10 and 13, they don't think I know anything. And I've already been aged, a byproduct and suffering from ageism in my own house. And I'm like, are you kidding? I'm 44. I actually know a lot. And they're like, well, our feet are bigger than yours and we're taller than you. So, and we already know everything. So how interesting is it? You
Well,
get
and
back what you put out there.
I've learned a lot from TikTok and Instagram Reels. That's for sure.
Me too.
I love that we have that access. I do think that we should be cautious and make sure that we get a lot of different voices, because then it can become an echo chamber of like just agreement. But yes, like kids, and I'm sure you probably thought that about your parents when you were a teen, like they didn't know anything, and that's stages that we go through. And then when people get really advanced age, it can be easy to dismiss them because maybe they're just processing slower, or they might not have the same way of communicating that we did. And I'll notice a lot that older adults, especially advanced, like so late, I have a friend who's in her late 90s, and I think hearing gets hard, so she'll just pull back. So if there's more than one person in a room, it's pull back. So if you're curious about being intergenerational, maybe make those one-on-one times and just sit with someone for a couple hours and see what comes out. It could be fun, maybe both ways too. I don't know. I mean
True. No,
kids
it's
can be
true.
fun, I guess, but.
And you said that the science shows. So what are some of the other things you learned that you guys were publishing or understanding about aging that we might not just recognize? Like, yes, cognitive function slows, but if Cognitive function slows, but if the person's more correct in the end, of course, that has tremendous value. We forget that. We just say,
Mhm.
oh my gosh, they think slower. We have
Yeah.
to have
Well, we
patience
don't
for
even wait to hear if they know the answer because we're just on to the next. And with our devices and with, our, 3-second attention spans, it
it.
is hard to sit there for 30 seconds and wait for someone to like maybe process and think.
True.
So what I was really, I had the gift of being given, like we had a large funder who funded my research that I was doing with Dr. Kirsten Grise. She and I created a study and looking at women's experience of aging. So we
Okay.
interviewed different people and we asked them all of the topics like, when you look in a mirror, what are you thinking? What does aging naturally mean to you? What does aging gracefully? Because we throw these words around, right? Like,
Yeah,
oh, they're aging gracefully. But what does that really mean? And what are we actually saying under that? Um,
totally.
and my thought was, as far as especially the image, is that I had anecdotal evidence where people will be like, oh my gosh, I looked in the mirror and I saw my mom or my grandma, because then it's like inside we feel, I mean, I fully know what I was doing well, not always at 21, but I know what it feels like to be 21 and I'm in a 54-year-old body,
Like,
so what is, how I am able to do things is very different. I don't have the same energy level. I can't drink the way I did, but maybe that's okay because my body's like saying no, thank you.
yeah,
But there is part of me that's like, oh, I am still that person because you are all your people, right? Like I'm all of all of my experiences from then until now. And I don't know where I was going with that, but yes, sorry, I got very distracted by that idea of like we're all of our people living
we
up.
are. And so in the science that you pulled, it's so interesting. You said women age, what is aging naturally and what is aging gracefully? And you were sharing some of those different questions that you asked. What are some of the other questions, and then what was the result of the study?
So it's I do qualitative, so that's storytelling interviews, and really we drilled down into sex and aging for like a conference, and the first paper we were writing because we have so much data that we still have lots to go through. But with the sex and aging, the title of our talk was, like, I don't want to wash any more socks or dirty underwear or something, because we were talking about relationships. And so when people's partners would pass, they'd be like, no, I don't want to be in another relationship. Like that was, I want to be my own person. So that was one caveat. We talked about how that shifts of like how we approach sexuality, how we approach, being connected and intimate, and how intimacy changes over time. And I know for myself that, for me, I was like, oh yeah, like ready to go. And then menopause hit and I'm like, oh, I'm not thinking like and I'm like, oh, there's a lot going on with the hormones, which is why I'm so wildly excited to be connected with you.
Mhm.
I have not gotten your tea yet, but it's, and the anti-inflammatory, because I had something that took me out of town, but I am like, I am on board,
Yeah.
and very excited because I've looked into your research as well. So that I very much digress. And, we talked, and then for my dissertation, I'll flip to a different research topic because that's on grief. And I talked to
Mhm.
women 50 and older who had recently lost their moms. So that's a gap in the research, right? Because we, knowing or unknowing, there's a hierarchy of grief that we kind of subscribe to. Loss of a child, like the the stuff of nightmares.
Sure.
And then people study loss of a partner because that can impact your living situation, your financial situation in many different ways.
Hmm.
And then on down the line. And so when you're doing a dissertation or research like that, you're trying to find the gap in the knowledge, and people don't normally talk about the loss of a parent, right? Especially if you're in your 50s, because that's in order, right? It's
Right.
to be expected. Whereas, loss of a child is definitely out of the order that we come to expect. However, people have had their parent for their lifetime. And so in my studies, what I found was she was my best friend, and she's who I went to with the hard stuff. And now this is hard and I don't know who to go to, all the way to someone saying, like, I spent my entire life trying to get her approval and I never got it. And I'm 67 and I feel like I've wasted my life. And
Wow.
everything in between, because think about mother-daughter relationships. They're really complex. And, we have this history. One woman, and every time I say this, it just, breaks my heart open, is she said, my mom is the only one who knew me before I was even introduced to the world. No one else knows me this way.
Wow. True.
Oh, it's
It's
beautiful.
so interesting. And I told you before we started, I didn't want to talk about grief. And now that you're speaking, I know why. August is the anniversary of my father's passing. And I don't talk about it much online, but my father passed away when he was 52 and I was 23. So he died in 2024, August. And I was scheduled to be married that November. So it was so shocking. And I had never had a death like that in my life before that happened. So it was so traumatizing. So I was like, bad things don't happen to me. My belief was bad things don't happen to me. My life is amazing and it's perfect and it's amazing. And then when that happened, it shifted my worldview, because I was like, oh, bad things do happen. That's the worst thing that can happen. How can I lose my parent? So it took time. I processed all the things. I've also got married that year. And then 20 years later, this last year, I lost my next dad. I lost my father-in-law to a heart attack. And I haven't talked about that online at all yet, but to lose two fathers 20 years apart, and they died within a day of each other. So those 2 days are coming up in about 2 weeks. And it's rough. Like, you're not, when people talk to me about it now, I'm like, well, I'm glad I got 23 years with my dad. He didn't pass away when I was 7 or 10. Like, I was a formed adult by 23. But my biggest regret is he's this powerhouse entrepreneur. And I finished entrepreneurship school, and then I've been all alone trying to be a successful entrepreneur for 20 years. If he had just been here, I know I would have won like 20 years ago. Like, it was not a question. So I just make sure I energetically talk to him every day and tune in, and I know I'm supported. And then losing my father-in-law was a shock, because he lived with me and I took care of him and I fed him, and I'm in the health world. So how could someone die on my watch? Like, that's insane to me. So I had to really process that one and go to therapy. And my therapist finally said, do you control everybody's health? Are you God? Do you control when your mom's going to go? And I was like, yes, if she'd listened to me, she would never go. And the therapist is like, really, Shivani, you control everyone's health at that level? I was like, well, if I love you and I'm in it with you, you should just listen to everything I have to say, and then you would live forever. And then no one else has to go. And so it's just such a beautiful, humbling conversation where at the end I was like, okay, you're right. I don't control anybody's health. Everyone has their own sovereignty. I have to release the reins of controlling everyone's life and health as if I can play God. And I can't do it. And so on that topic of grief, which I hate the topic, because I really hate anyone leaving us ever. I really am very childlike in my attachment to everybody. And I really do actually avoid the topic of death. Like, when someone has a trauma, I'm like, I just need that resolved. Like, that needs to be fixed. I don't want to go in that room. I don't want to touch it. I hate funerals, all of it. It really, it's just a childlike thing in me that I have not grown up or grown out of. So
Well,
how
first,
do you guide people on this?
well, so many things are coming to mind, but first of all, thank you for, trusting me and trusting the audience with, sharing that, because that is really hard, like that, and especially when you're talking like a couple days apart, it just brings everything home in a way that's like shocking to the system. So absolutely. I would, you're saying childlike, and I'm putting my hand in my heart center, but I would offer compassion, because I don't think that's childish. I don't think that is, I don't think that that's something that you're supposed to grow out of. And maybe you can like work so that you could stand a little closer to it, because, as we know, these things will happen as much as, you'd like them not to. But I first say, like, offering yourself compassion and going like, this is hard, like, and acknowledge. And it's not like, oh, I should be better at this. No, absolutely not. Like, grief, no matter how many times whether it's the first time or the 100th time, it's going to hit us differently. It's going to hit us differently based on the relationships that we had with that person. It's going to hit us differently based on where we are at in our own life. It makes us face our mortality. And what I will say is that when we can contemplate, when we can get a little bit closer to it, I see in myself and people that I've talked to, that it can wake you up to the preciousness of life, right? So instead of like, I'm running away from loss or I'm running away from grief, it's like, okay, this moment, and maybe someone's irritating you, like someone might not be listening to you in the way that they should in order to have their best life. And maybe in that moment, it's taking a deep breath and going like, oh, you are hard-headed. Huh. Okay. I would miss this if you weren't here. And so then then it can bring you to that present moment and waking up. And not every moment, again, can be, love and light and all of that stuff, and nor should it. But, it can make those moments of frustration. As I said recently in a talk that I had given, I said that these moments are clarifying. And if you go to any funeral, if anyone talks about any loss, and I'm sure when you think about your father-in-law or your dad, it's the small things. It's not some big grandiose gesture, or, oh, they bought me a this, or, I mean, maybe it could be, if that was meaningful, but it usually, when I am talking to people, it is the freaking little things. It is the, and then you almost do that flip where it's like, oh my God, that irritated me. Oh, that was so them, to not want to get out of bed in the morning, or to, push back at every little thing. And then you're like, oh, but so what I try to do is do that in the moment. I also try to never leave anything unsaid. I am that weirdo that when I talk to my friends, I'm like, I love you, because I don't know, no moment is promised to us. And so when I stay close to it, then I feel more connected, because I'm allowing the awareness that it's not going to last. Oh, but then I think, oh, I study this, I'm in this good place. And then I get knocked on my axle, off my axle. I don't know how, with a grief situation, I'll be like, oh yeah, it hurts and it's hard. So I think in those moments, it's coming with compassion, not beating yourself up, and then creating rituals. Like, do you have any rituals that you said you connect energetically with your dad every day, but is there anything tangible or specific that you do to connect to those men in your life?
Not really. I mean, when I do sit to meditate, I usually light a candle, and that's when I tune into my guides, my angels, and then my two dads now. And I had to rename my dad Father, because I called dad Dad. So it was like, oh my gosh, how do you say two people? Who are you talking to? So it was interesting. I had to rename my first dad. But I did start this thing about 2 years ago. I was like, it's August 22nd. It's my dad. I found a place locally where you can donate food. And around the month of August, I was like, I need to do something that I feel good about. And so I talked to the lady, Gina. She's at this place called Meals for Meaning here in Boca. And she's like, of course you can donate food on that anniversary, of course. And she asked me, she's like, what would your dad want? I said, my dad was a health nut. And so all he had us do all the time was take vitamins and eat fruit. And he was always excited about different fruit. And it's so weird because I'm just like my dad in all the ways. I just made a video today about fruit that came, and I was so excited. It's funny how the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, pun intended. And so I bought a truck full of produce, and I went there and delivered fresh produce for us to give, the homeless who were showing to that place. And it felt so good. It felt right to give to them.
Yes, absolutely. And what would your father-in-law, what would your dad want?
I've been thinking about it, and I don't know, because I was pretty controlling. I was like, Dad, I need you on a lower carb diet. I'm trying to take away the bread. I'm trying to increase your protein. So poor guy, under my watch, was not living the diet he wanted. But it's funny because we're going to plan like a ceremony. It's not funny, but we're going to plan a ceremony, and I'm trying to come up with the food. So there's certain Indian foods that brought a lot of comfort, but you wouldn't give that to others. Like Indian food is not what everyone eats. Samosas. So
Maybe you can get introduced to that through your dad.
Sure.
Like, come on, like, have his favorite food and let them go to McDonald's after if they didn't like it.
Sure. Experience it.
Yeah, like let them experience your relationship with your dad through the foods he enjoyed.
Yeah.
And maybe they'll be like, I've never tried this and I love it.
Right.
Yeah. I would hold firm to not trying to cater to what other people might want or be familiar with, and say, hey, this is him. You're here because you love and want to support me and my family. So we're going to share a memory, and this is how we're going to do it, is through food. And maybe you could even talk about, like, especially if it was a heavy carb, you could be like, I didn't let him have this all the time. So eat and enjoy it for him.
And when we kicked off the podcast, that's a question I wanted to ask you was, one debate, I have many debates, but one debate I have in my mind is I teach health. And I want everyone to live this anti-inflammatory diet and do their self-care and move their bodies. I have a pretty big list of what it takes to build foundational health. And even I struggle to do everything that I say. So I go through seasons where some seasons I'm like, I'm chill, it's summer. And then I kick into fall and I'm like, all right, game on, back into the whole swing of things. But so many people around me are like, are you going to take away everything from me? Like, life is short. And here you will not drink, lychee martinis with us. You won't eat gluten. You won't eat dessert. Like, you don't live, and we want to live, and you can't make us feel bad about it. We want our soda. We want our fast food. We want our things. So did you ever have that conversation in the school around like aging, but also it's not keeping your vices is the wrong word, but keeping those things that might be detrimental to your health as you're aging, but they are part of living life, like the 20% of having fun.
Well, and I think that comes to, this is so fascinating because I have those conversations with myself too. And, and I'm in this space. And so, and I understand, both things, what's the middle way? We could go to extremes, and why are we going to extremes? And so I have been, coming back to, I think I said this at the beginning, awareness. So with awareness, how am I feeling? And can I be aware of how I'm feeling without judgment? Because you said, don't make us feel bad, or I'm not going to feel bad. Well, if you're making a choice to have McDonald's and a soda, okay. But can you get curious about how you actually feel? Are you running to the bathroom? Are you like feeling joint pain? But without judgment, right? So again, because then it becomes choice after choice after choice. And I'm saying that those pathways aren't easy to, kind of reshape. We can, at any age, we can get new neural pathways and we can change behavior. But I think any behavior change is most effective with compassion, curiosity, and awareness. Because if I'm just drinking because it's a habit of drinking, and it's fun, come on. But then for a week later, my anxiety's increased. I'm not sleeping. My depression is, or my mood is tanking. Well, is that what I want? Right. So then it becomes more like, versus like, oh, beating myself up, which I've done plenty, like, oh, you shouldn't have done that. And why'd you do that? My practice is to go, oh, well, how are you feeling? Right. And then if I'm like, oh, I'm feeling like crap. Okay, well, and then I can link, and I can go like, okay, so this choice led to this. This choice led to this. And it's not about the shoulds and the have tos, because diet culture gets too icky in here, right?
Totally.
Because what you're talking about is functional health. You are talking about like, how do I live well in this container I've been given? And we're fighting against GMOs. We're fighting against like easy access to fast food. We're fighting against numbing. We're like, oh, everything is too much, so let me sit in front of the TV with a bag of popcorn. And you can do that. Certainly. I'm saying, yes, you can do all the things, but Pay attention. And then are you actually then going to choose it? And I said this recently. I had this, I love this conversation, but I had heard myself say differently, and it's just been really impacting me this past week, is that I will do things, like drink or eat gluten, which gluten makes me feel inflamed almost immediately. And I really hurt. And some people, I'm just side note, are having gluten and they're having inflammatory thing. And you used a great phrase about aging. You called it inflammaging.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So your voice has been in my head, because it's like, what are we doing that are making us feel old? But because we have this ageist belief that aging sucks, then you're like, well, this is aging and I can't do anything. And you're like, yes, you freaking can.
Absolutely.
And I'm saying that too. But so I'm going to go back to what I'm trying to land the plane here, is that I had said, if a friend said to me, when you do that, it makes me feel bad, I would never do it again. Never. I would never do it again. But my body has been telling me this and this and this and this makes me feel bad. And for probably, I would say, a good decade, especially through grad school and COVID and all that stuff, I was like, shh, we're just going to keep doing this, because cognitively, I'm like, this makes me feel better. But if I actually, with kindness and non-judgment, get still and go like, how am I feeling? And is that how I want to feel? And would I treat a friend that way? That's
true. It's so true. I this week ate something. I was like in the office. I think my kid must have had a snack and I was like, I want one. I ate whatever I ate and I asked myself the question, tune into how you feel after you ate it. Just see. And my foot started hurting. And I was like, oh yeah, like I'm having a little plantar fasciitis. But I could recognize that there was pain associated with the behavior. And I was like, see, that's called inflammation. And so it was just so funny to prove my own point to myself. I was like, see, if you actually paid attention, just like what you're saying, we don't pay attention. We think, oh my gosh, I'm eating the yummy food. But do we ever pause and think, how does that make me feel? Is it giving me a headache? Like, what is that doing inside of my body? And earlier you mentioned naturally aging gracefully and aging naturally. And I'm curious how you would define them. I would define them. It's interesting because I was thinking about it after you said it. Aging gracefully to me is being happy while you age. Because I do see a lot of people who, I'm living in Boca Raton, Florida. South Florida is like the land of caring about your aesthetics. So aging gracefully is accepting that as we age, we might change how we dress, we might change how we move through the earth and things like that, instead of trying to dress 20 years younger or doing a lot. Like here, it's also the land of plastic surgery and Botox and all those kinds of things. Like aging without tons of intervention to me is aging gracefully, like accepting as you age. And then aging naturally is not choosing to do all those interventions, like literally choose, like I'm going to allow my body to age, but I'm going to do so much to build foundational health as I work through. So I wonder how you define it, because I hadn't thought about it much till you said it.
And we do. And I am of the mindset that, again, it's like the intention behind it. So, are you doing cosmetic things because it actually makes you feel good? Or are you doing it because you're resisting something? Right. So I would say if, and I would be curious if people actually paused and said, when I look in the mirror, do I like what I'm seeing? Or am I doing this because I'm trying to make other people not see what's happening? Sure. So I think there's a fine line. And I mean, I interviewed a woman who in that original study, she was an attorney and she wanted to keep working, and she made a very clear and calm decision that she wanted a facelift because she felt like she needed to have a younger appearance to continue working to the one she wanted. No regrets. She was like, I wanted to do this. This is what I did. But it was a thoughtful thing, right? And I think so many people are just like knee jerk, like, oh my God, there's a wrinkle, and do this. And then all of a sudden they're not recognizable. And so I think it's the intention behind it. The same with aging naturally, because, I would say that we're, I do have a benefit of having kind of a round face, no matter what size I am. So I will age well in my face. I don't have a lot of lines that other people have. So, I am also aware that when I'm talking about this, I'm like, well, would I feel differently if I had,
Sure.
different skin? I don't know. But aging naturally for me is that taking care of your container and being aware and going like, this is a change. And maybe you have to pause and grieve that change. Maybe there's a moment of just being like, oh, I used to run and now I can't run and it bums me out. And I can bicycle and I can go for a walk. So it's that yes and of like, I'm aware, I'm giving myself compassion. I might have to grieve the loss of something. I might have to grieve, for me as, I grieve the loss of a strong libido. I am going to work with someone, anyways, that's a whole different podcast. But, but I think that there's in that awareness. And when you had that treat and it made your foot hurt, what I didn't hear was like judgment. You confirmed like, oh yeah, okay, I confirmed that is inflammatory and I do feel it in my body. I think what happens is people have that negative reaction and they're like, oh, you shouldn't have eaten that. You're dumb. You fell off the wagon.
Sure.
How many people have you talked to on diets who then, they fall off the wagon and that's all they can talk about. And, and that's not going to inspire change, right? Mm-hmm. That's going to inspire more of this kind of thrashing around and tumultuous thinking. So I think if you can approach it and go non-judgmentally, oh, that's curious. For me, with drinking, I realized what I really wanted was permission to lay on the couch on a Sunday.
Yeah.
But that was after like getting real curious. And I was like, oh, I don't have to make myself sick in order to choose to watch stupid TV for a couple hours on a Sunday.
Yeah, you can just do that anyway.
Right. But so like, it's always like, what's underneath it? What's underneath the desire for plastic surgery? What's underneath the, this diet mentality? And how can I then support my body and my lived experience with love and maybe love is a strong word for some people, maybe acceptance and, like this is the reality. Like the reality right now is I'm carrying 80 extra pounds. I don't feel comfortable and I am working towards that, but I don't beat myself up about it. I don't I wear cute clothes, and so two things are possible. Right. I'm carrying extra weight. I'm in menopause. And how can I then work with this? Like, what's the possibility?
And, I really invite our audience to think and reflect on that question of what is aging naturally? What is aging gracefully? And if you need to grieve some piece of aging that has shifted things for you, how can you acknowledge it, grieve it, and then move forward? Because I do think about that. Like I traveled this year a lot and I grieve the fact that my feet don't let me walk as far as I want to pain-free. I always have like plantar fasciitis and bunions and I have to think so hard about what shoes I'm wearing and they have to be like the Brooks with the guardrails with the custom orthotics. I can't wear cute shoes. Like I think a lot about shoes and I will go to dinner carrying shoes because I want to wear the cute shoes, but I cannot possibly die for more than about 20 minutes without becoming a really not happy girl. So it's just, it is something to grieve. Like, okay, this is part of my journey. Yeah. Sometimes I think I should fix my feet and do something, but it is getting worse with age. So I already have a thought of like, can I walk at 80 or is this going to be a problem for me? But can we just acknowledge and take a moment and look at what we're not happy about and also figure out what am I willing to do about it? So I'm actually not anti-plastic surgery or any of that because what I'm pro is feel so good in your body about how you look and how you feel that you are in a self-perpetuating motion around taking even better care of yourself. And I had breast reduction surgery a few years ago and I talk about it because I'm like, guys, it was the best thing I ever did. Like I can run now. I can move in ways I couldn't. I was very restricted by what was happening. And I had constant neck and back pain. So I have gone through different things in my life where now I'm like, do what you need to do to be happy,
Yes.
do it
Yes.
earlier. So you're happier even earlier.
Yeah.
And so I was excited to have you on the podcast today because I've not talked about aging. I've certainly not talked about grief because I avoid it with a 100-foot pole. Um, and how can we approach aging from a different perspective instead of it being the enemy, instead of being horrible, instead of it being this like gauntlet we're walking towards? How can we approach it differently with, like you said,
Mhm.
love, compassion, curiosity, and what's the last one? Attention?
Non-judgment and attention.
Yeah.
So awareness, I guess. Awareness.
Awareness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because, yeah. And I love being on here and having this conversation because I think it's so important, especially, with the work that we're doing and what is the intention behind it. Again, like I love that you made a thoughtful decision to shift something in your body that we have the technology to do now.
Right.
Versus just suffering. And if something like with your face or whatever is empowering and it makes you feel good, absolutely
do it.
But if it's because it's fear, and in resistance to, maybe just get curious about that.
Exactly. And, my final thought on it is, as we're talking about aging, how can we look at aging from new and different perspectives? Because it might be that you're in one path. I know I am. Like, I think of it as my family doesn't age well. Last quarter of life is really bad. You better do a lot of work not to end up like your family. That's actually my main thought form around aging is don't be like your family. You've got work to do. Versus, could it be different? Could it be, I am not my family. I have made completely different decisions for the last 20 years around my health. And what would I like aging to look like? And then my second question for us to reflect on, and I'm curious what yours are, but my second one is, even in my own house, I am experiencing aging because my children, ageism actually, my children literally look at me like, you don't know anything. And so what that's caused me to do is take a huge step back and be like, fine, I don't know anything. I don't know anything. Fine. All my time can go into my work, my friends, my life. I know I'm awesome in every other area, but just as a mother, apparently I know nothing. So I will facilitate your life. But apparently I'm not the one to ask questions to. And I just caught it last night because my children said, well, Daddy knows all the answers. Daddy does our homework with us. And I actually, because I'm a mom who handles their whole day, drop off to pick up, I don't want to do their homework. Like I did enough. But apparently that intersection point to them is the proof that he knows better. So then I thought, do I care to get into it or not? Maybe I'll just stay the one that doesn't know any answers. And I was like, no, I do want them to realize that I do know everything. So I'm going to get in there and at least with the younger one, go do the homework. I can be counted.
I give you a little reflection with that too, because
it's so funny though, because if I was a grandparent in the house, wouldn't it be interesting? It's the same thing.
Yes. And, just on the balance of duties to run a household. Okay. So yeah, if your husband could suddenly do drop off to pick up, then you're going to sit and do homework. But, we expect so much as women, to do that. There's a book called The Second Shift of like how much we take on outside of like work that men don't even think about. And that's not to bag on men. It's just how we've been set up. So I do want to say, yeah, if you don't do homework, they're going to eventually realize that you run a thriving business and have this amazing community that hangs on your words. So they'll figure it out. Like, their friends will start going like, oh, your mom is da da da. And then they'll be like, yeah, she's pretty bad. She's pretty bad. Pretty bad. So I think that, whatever is your skills, it's not that you don't know anything because you didn't do homework. You know a lot. And that's why you're doing homework. You know enough to have balance in your family and let your husband take one of the things.
Right.
So if that's their perception, like you said, you can't change their perception. You could be like, I could get letters of recommendation from all of my friends and customers if you'd like to see how smart I am.
I know. It's just so funny.
But yes, that ageism. But what I would say is that we often create our own internalized ageism by having these thoughts. So when you're confronted with someone saying, oh, you don't know anything, you could even just say, oh, I bet that's your perception. I thought of that about my parents too. Isn't that weird? And then just move on with your day.
Right.
And then I think when we're confronted with our own ageism, if we're interacting, I think it's again, just going like, oh, if I think this about that person, what am I thinking about my own aging, and how am I making it maybe more challenged, or, a little rougher? Because if I start thinking, those people who look like they're struggling, like, I don't want that. That's aversion. And, you're doing things differently from your family, certainly. And that's amazing. And there's genetics. And so if you're confronted down the line with some challenges, maybe you're preparing for that instead. You're going like, wow, okay, so this happened to, at this age, how can I support that? Do I have things in place so that I can support my health to the best of my ability? And how can I lean on my community and have, maybe share that, because, chronic stress makes things worse. And
yeah, true. No, very true. And so do you have any final thoughts that you want to share today with our audience around this topic, what you teach, what you do, and how you support people?
Oh, thank you. So I do workshops on mindful aging, which have been really well received, where we actually look at these things and how do we apply a mindfulness lens to meeting these challenges, because there are a lot of transitions as we age. We notice different things in our bodies. We might have different losses, and even, I had one woman in a workshop who had recently retired, and she's like, it's not what I thought it would look like. And so we're dealing with kind of like the projective, like what it's going to be when we're aging, but also then what is the reality.
Right.
So mindful aging workshops, I don't currently have any dates set, but I'll be listing those. So you can sign up for my newsletter through my website, and that is ccwithdrt.com. I named it after the podcast that I have, which is Creating Connection with Dr. T. So ccwithdrt.com, or you can find it through my name, Theresa B. Skaar. And on my website, I have opportunities like I have a Befriending the Body bundle. So, you put your email in and you'll get, it's like a workbook on how to make more friends with your body with a connected meditation. I also have meditations on Insight Timer. So if anyone's using the app Insight Timer, it's a free, and then you can pay for apps, but all of my meditations are free. So you can search my name there or find it on my website. And I do one-on-one coaching, and I also speak at conferences. And so I'm a professional speaker talking about, stress and burnout, talking about communication, mindful leadership, and that type of thing. So yeah.
Beautiful. All the good things. I love that. Very nice.
So fun. It's so fun.
So nice to connect with you today. When I met you, I was like, whoa, teaching at a pro-aging institute center. This is fascinating. Never something I've heard of. I've heard of gerontologists. I've heard of doctors who specialize in working with, is the elderly the right word? Working with our mature population?
I prefer the term elder, but there was a big study done where older adults were asked what they'd like to be called, and they prefer older adults.
Okay.
Or seniors. Elderly has a very specific connotation. That is like if someone's really frail, and that's what you think of. But, I'm 54. If someone called me elderly, I would be like, you're cracked. I don't know what you're talking about. Right. But, if I'm 30 years, you're elder, I guess I find that a respectful term. But people like older adults, and most people would just want to be called their name. But yeah, and it is exciting to say we're aging. Every body is aging. So how can we shift how we talk about it or how we think about it without denying the challenges, without denying my feet don't take me as far as that they used to, or my body is doing this or that.
Right.
Because those are real. I'm not saying deny it. I'm also saying how can we think about it and shift that?
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. And if anyone wants to reach out to you and learn more, she shared her website, ccwithdrt.com. Thank you, everyone, for tuning into the podcast today. The Fusionary Health Podcast is here to help you understand different approaches to our health, to our body, to our everything as we age gracefully and naturally. So thank you for joining today. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today and who could appreciate and enjoy what we've shared here today. So thank you guys for joining us.
Thanks for joining me for this episode. Check out our sponsor, Fusionary Formulas, the potent turmeric supplement used by doctors around the U.S. for patients with pain and inflammation. www.fusionaryformulas.com. I'm your host, Dr. Shivani Gupta. For more, visit shivanigupta.com. Subscribe to this podcast in Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Click the follow button or subscribe in any of the apps that you use. That's all I've got for you on the Fusionary Health Podcast this week. You have the power to transform your health and achieve vibrant health starting today.